You're here because you want your bike to go faster. Most riders jump straight to engine upgrades and overlook the simplest, most accessible lever, your gearing. I'll show you one cheap, reversible change that reshapes how your bike accelerates off the line or cruises at speed without ever touching the engine. And before we get too deep, drop your bike model in the comments. Or just tell me if you ride mostly city or highway. That way you'll see exactly which setup makes sense for you. We'll start by clearing up a big misconception. Horsepower isn't the only shortcut to speed. Why horsepower isn't the only shortcut to speed? Why do some riders walk away more impressed after swapping a $40 sprocket than after dropping $600 on a shiny exhaust system? That surprise comes down to one thing: how the bike delivers its existing power. Chasing horsepower upgrades alone often overlooks the drivetrain, which is where one of the simplest, cheapest, and most effective changes hides in plain sight. A small adjustment in gearing doesn't create new horsepower, but it can feel like it because the engine's output reaches the wheel in a sharper, more responsive way. The horsepower obsession traps riders into thinking every ounce of speed lives inside the combustion chamber or exhaust pipes. But in reality, real-world performance isn't only about how much power you make. It's about how efficiently that power gets to the ground. Think of it like turning a stubborn bolt with a wrench. The longer the handle, the easier the job feels, even though your arm strength hasn't changed. Gearing works exactly the same way. Adjust the sprocket size and suddenly your bike feels lighter off the line or more relaxed at a steady cruise. Many riders even start with something as simple as a one-tooth change in the front sprocket because it's cheap, easy, and delivers an immediate difference in how the bike responds. This is where perspective matters. Spending hundreds on a performance intake or aftermarket pipe adds sound and maybe a couple of horsepower on paper. But if your gearing is mismatched, that money can feel wasted. The bike may still hesitate in the same situations, and you'll wonder why the upgrade didn't deliver what you imagined. Before bolting on expensive upgrades, it makes sense to check your drivetrain ratios first. Get the gearing right, and every other modification you add later benefits more. Skip that step, and you risk chasing numbers without ever fixing the feel. Think about daily riding. If you commute in the city, you rarely sit at full throttle long enough to enjoy those extra horsepower numbers. What you actually want is stronger pull from stoplights, smoother roll-ons in traffic, and quicker response when you need to merge. Those improvements come from gearing, not just raw horsepower. Swap a sprocket, and suddenly every green light feels sharper and every gap in traffic easier to take. If your bike lives on the track, gearing decisions matter even more, because a small ratio change can put you in the perfect part of the power band coming out of every corner. Either way, it's about control of delivery, not chasing peak horsepower figures. The strange part is how overlooked this upgrade still is. Riders invest in ECU tunes and dyno sessions, yet the transformative difference often comes from a part that costs less than a basic oil change. And unlike some modifications that require fine-tuning or specialized tools, a sprocket swap can be simple enough to handle at home, or at least straightforward for a local shop. That's why riders who try it are often the ones bragging about how much quicker their bike feels compared to friends who spent a weekend bolting on louder exhausts. It's not that the sprocket gave them more horsepower, it's that it unlocked more of the performance their engine was already producing. So the takeaway is simple. Horsepower might look impressive on a spec sheet, but gearing dictates how that power actually feels on the road. With just a single tooth forward or back, you can tilt your bike towards snappy acceleration or long, smooth cruising. In the next part, I'll show you exactly how one small change can transform your everyday rides. So noticeable that it feels like someone stuffed an extra dose of horsepower into your bike overnight. The city hack. Turn one sprocket into 20 phantom horsepower. Now let's get into the city hack that riders talk about so often. The trick where one small sprocket swap makes your bike feel like it picked up a big horsepower bump. It's not literal horsepower, of course, but the effect in traffic can be dramatic. By going one tooth smaller on the front sprocket or adding a couple of teeth at the rear, you shorten the gearing and multiply torques at the wheel. That change alone can turn a sluggish commuter into something that responds instantly to throttle, perfect for urban riding, where stoplights, merging, and quick gaps define the experience. Here's what's happening. The ratio between your front and rear sprockets works just like gear choices on a bicycle. A smaller front or larger rear tightens that ratio, which multiplies the engine's torque at the wheel. Your dyno numbers don't change. The motor makes the same peak horsepower, but the delivery feels completely different. Let the clutch out, and the bike moves forward without hesitation. That's why riders describe it as phantom power. It's the same strength your engine has always produced, redirected into a sharper response you can feel in your hands and body every time you launch from a stop. A typical first step many riders take is replacing the front sprocket with one tooth less than stock. It's affordable, reversible, and often doesn't require a new chain, which is why it's the preferred entry-level change. Drop that one tooth and you notice it right away. Quicker launches, livelier mid-range, and a throttle that feels more connected when weaving through traffic. For a mid-sized commuter that always felt a bit hesitant, the difference can be the confidence boost you've been missing. Like every modification, there are trade-offs. Shorter gearing raises engine RPM at any given road speed. That means if you cruise at 60 on the highway, you'll see your tachometer fatter in the middle of the dial than before. The payoff is urgency in the city, but you give back some top-end speed and quieter cruising ability. For riders who spend most of their time in stop-and-go traffic, this is usually a worthwhile compromise. You rarely use maximum speed in town, but you constantly start, stop, and roll back on the throttle. The core principle is simple. Rear wheel torque equals engine torque multiplied by gear ratio. Increase the ratio, and you magnify what your engine is already giving you. In practical terms, that means stronger launches, easier passes in second gear, and a riding experience that feels more immediate. It's very much like dropping into an easier gear on a bicycle climb. You're not stronger, but the leverage makes the effort feel lighter and the response quicker. The downside is that when you look for outright speed at the top of the rev range, you'll reach the ceiling sooner. That brings up a common concern: wear and longevity. Shorter gearing does place more tension on the chain and keeps the engine spinning higher more often. Done carelessly, that can accelerate wear on your drivetrain. But this is not a reason to avoid the mod. It's a reason to maintain correctly. If you go this route, make it a habit to check chain tension regularly, keep it clean and lubricated, and inspect sprocket teeth for signs of wear. Follow your owner's manual for adjustment intervals, and most bikes handle this setup for tens of thousands of miles without issue. The real-world results are hard to ignore. A commuter that once dragged its feet suddenly feels eager and fun. Red lights no longer mean fighting to reach traffic speed because the bike is already responding the second you roll on. The cost sits somewhere in the range of a tank or two of fuel, and it doesn't require advanced tools or hours in the garage. It's one of the cheapest, clearest upgrades you can make if your riding reality is city streets. What this upgrade doesn't do is make sense everywhere. If your rides are mostly highway stretches or long tours, living in higher RPM all the time becomes more of a drawback. That's where the opposite gearing strategy comes into play. A swap that calms the bike down, stretches your fuel, and keeps vibrations in check. I'll get into how that works next. The highway hack. Go faster with less effort. You're cruising on the highway at a steady 75, but the engine is buzzing high, working harder than you are. This is the exact scenario where taller gearing makes sense. The simple change of adding a tooth or two to the front sprocket or trimming a few from the rear. With that adjustment, the bike stops screaming for relief and starts gliding with far less effort. Here's what changes. A taller gear ratio means each revolution of the engine carries the rear wheel farther. At the same highway speed, your RPM drops, which translates directly into less vibration through the bars and pegs, a calmer engine note, and often better fuel economy. Riders who log long miles on straight roads appreciate this because it makes the ride smoother, quieter, and less fatiguing. Your tank stretches farther, your hands stop tingling, and the bike feels more relaxed, as if it's built for distance instead of sprints. That comfort comes at a cost, and it's important to be upfront about it. Taller gearing takes away urgency at low speeds. The bike feels slower to launch, and throttle response becomes heavier compared to stock or shorter gearing. On city streets or in twisty terrain, that can feel like a letdown. You roll on and wait longer for the bike to gather speed. If you spend most of your time in traffic or on back roads, you'll notice this trade-off immediately. But if your reality is wide-open freeway stretches, the payoff in smoother cruising usually outweighs the loss in snap. Think of a touring rider eating up hundreds of miles on interstates. Stock gearing can leave the tach needle hovering high, engine heat building, and fuel consumption creeping upward. After swapping to taller gearing, that same bike sits in a calmer rev band, vibrations largely fade, and the tank carries them farther before hitting reserve. The difference isn't about raw speed, it's about reducing strain so you can keep rolling comfortably hour after hour. And over time, the engine itself benefits. Fewer piston cycles at cruise means less wear and tear, less unnecessary heat, and a motor that often feels fresher after thousands of highway miles. But balance is key. Push gearing too tall, and you risk dulling the bike to the point where it feels sluggish even after a downshift. It's not just inconvenient, it can actually be unsafe if you don't have the response you expect when merging or overtaking. That's why most riders stick to small sprocket changes, 1 or 2 teeth at most, instead of radical jumps. Before making the swap, make sure your chain length is compatible and consult your owner's manual or a shop if you're unsure. A miscalculated change can leave you fighting fitment issues or dealing with a bike that no longer suits the roads you ride. Mechanically, taller gearing spreads load differently across the drivetrain. Sudden chain stress often decreases, but your engine faces a slightly heavier pull when climbing through the revs. This isn't inherently a problem, but it does mean you should stay on top of your maintenance. Keep the chain inspected, check throttle feel during regular rides, and if the bike feels lazier than you'd like, use that feedback to decide if the gearing adjustment needs fine-tuning. For riders focused on long-distance comfort, improved mileage, and less wear on the engine, this is one of the most practical modifications available. A taller gear ratio won't make your bike rocket off the line, but it transforms highway riding into a smoother, quieter, and more efficient experience. The smartest riders recognize that it's not about copying someone else's setup. It's about matching your gearing to the way you actually ride, whether that means carving through traffic or devouring miles on the open road. In the end, gearing isn't just a technical adjustment, it's a decision about the kind of speed and control you want from your bike. That choice is what separates a machine that fights you from one that feels built for the roads you ride most often. Speed isn't just about horsepower, it's about using the power you already have more effectively. A sprocket swap is one of the simplest ways to do that, often costing under $200 and sometimes well under that depending on your bike and parts. Here's the quick takeaway. If you ride mostly in the city, shorter gearing gives you snappier launches and stronger mid-range. If you spend your time on highways and long trips, taller gearing calms the engine and makes cruising more efficient. So let me know in the comments, do you want more acceleration or more relaxed top speed? Drop your bike model and your usual riding environment too, because that context matters. And if you want more wrenching tips that actually change how your bike feels, hit like and subscribe. It helps you ride smarter and helps this channel grow. Before you sink money into expensive engine mods, always consider gearing first. It's practical, affordable, and often makes the biggest difference.